from Jean-Michel Jarre, who graciously joined us at the last minute. We're so happy to have him here. So I'm going to go ahead and stop my screen share for a second. All right, welcome everybody. I'd say good morning or good afternoon or good evening. It's my pleasure to introduce you to the 50th anniversary celebration of Alan Pearlman's work and the first ARP synthesizer known as the 2500. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Dina Pearlman. I am the daughter of Alan R. Pearlman and the executive director of the Alan R. Pearlman Foundation. In a few moments, we're going to look at a brief overview of this magnificent machine. And thanks to Alex Ball's documentary, Electromotive, we're going to have an excerpt of that. I do want to say the symposium is a culmination of a 20-month vision that originally was intended to be a concert and workshop event that was going to be held at MEAP in person. But we're in the midst of one of the most difficult years of our lifetime. And so we came up with this idea of the virtual symposium in tandem with MEAP. Along the way, we met some amazing inventors, artists, technicians, engineers, historians, educators, visionaries, performers, and producers who you see here today. The ARP synthesizer was the first synthesizer I had ever seen, and to this day, I still get shivers when I hear it. The fact that it resulted in music ranging from ethereal to rhythmic, soundtracks to performance art speaks volumes. Sorry about the pun. Its versatility and unique ergonomic characteristics make it one of the most beautiful machines to behold. Visualized by my father, conceived and designed by Alan and his team, including Dennis Cullen, Ken McNeil, Dave Friend, Manny Mandel, Dick Stearns, Barry Ober, and more, and used by the likes of Pete Townsend, Hans Zimmer, Jean-Michel Jarre, who will be joining us, and the talented group of people that you are going to meet today. It remains an icon. I want to thank all of you for taking your time out of your day to come on to yet another Zoom meeting, but I think this will be wonderful and unusual. And thank you very much for your support of the foundation and for using ARP Instruments. I'm going to put Jean-Michel, and he's going to say a few words, and then hopefully will join us later. Jean-Michel, thank you. What a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Dina, for inviting me, and I feel really honored to be part of this prestigious panel today. And I hope you're all safe in these strange times of the year. I mean, we all hope that next time we could be in the same room to celebrate your dad and the 2500 and beyond, and also doing some music maybe together. And it's a real pleasure. And I must say that I really wanted, even if we are in quite a distance geographically, I mean, in spirit, we are all close to you and to your dad's legacy. For me, your dad changed my life, so like lots of other people being part of the panel today. And I've always been more an ARP guy than, you have the Beatles guy or a Stones guy. And I've always been more an ARP guy than a Moog guy, with all respect for Bob. Even if I love, of course, and I used a lot of Moog in my life. I mean, for me, the 2600 and the 2500 for me have been absolutely changed my life in terms of inspiration, in terms of way of shaping sounds, and also this it was a total specific approach that I always felt very organic in a way, by rather dealing only with cables, but dealing with faders, and in a very tactile, sensual way. And it's what I love so much with 2500 is actually this kind of, I mean, almost a sensual, sexual approach to the panel, where you can really have a kind of a kind of I wouldn't say I don't find another word than really organic and sensual and tactile. That was the word I was looking for, and also the of course the sound also changed my life in terms of as a composer, I mean, in electronic music, as we know, we are all craftsmen in a sense. I mean, doing our own sounds, and that of course your dad and have been a few of these genius changing lives of musicians by giving us the possibility to shaping sounds instead of just dealing with existing instruments with existing timbres and colors. Even if we are I'm not questioning the fact that we can, and so many masterpieces have been done with an orchestra, but actually with a synthesizer, you can, as we know, and it's almost a cliche to say that between us, because we all know this, but actually it's the fact that being your own deus ex machina in terms of composition and timbres is something that is particularly true with an instrument such as the 2500, with this constant balance between the idea you want to achieve and the accident rising. The fact that you are looking for something, and on the way you're losing yourself, and the fact that you're losing yourself is probably more important than the first idea you had before you started to dealing and wheeling with knobs and faders. So I won't be too long, because I would be very happy to join you later on. But I'm very, very happy to be close to you, Dina, especially, and of course sharing some feelings and discussions with such a prestigious panel. So thank you again.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Hopefully we'll see you soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
I'm going to stay for another few minutes, and then I will leave quietly, and we'll go back to you in 1 hour or two.
Okay, wonderful. So I'm going to play a little excerpt of Alex Ball's documentary, the part that starts to cover the beginning of ARP synthesizers. And while we do so, I'd like to ask the first panel group to put on their video. All right, so as all live performances, sometimes we have moments that are not working. Let's see, let's go ahead and share screen.
Dina, if I may, I would like to add just something I forgot. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, just to say that I've been recently, I mean, my good friends Pete Townsend, we did a track together on one of my recent albums. And we all, of course, had a long chat about the 2500, and actually in the track for Collaborator that we did together, I used, of course, 2500 for a double tribute to your dad and to Pete, of course, because he's been, as we know, one of the first musicians to introduce synthesizers in rock music, and it has been very important for electronic musicians, and of course for making known the 2500 into a style of music and a style of audience totally quite remote from the world of electronic music at that time. So I just wanted to add this kind of word and my thoughts, lovely thoughts to Pete, because I'm sure that he would be delighted to be a part of us.
Yes, he wasn't able to join us, but he wished us well. It would have been lovely to have him here as well. Thank you so much for those thoughts.
Well, yes.
Yes, Rich snuck over to England and he's hanging out. All righty, thank you so much for those words. Yes. First want to introduce Barry Ober. Barry Ober is an audio engineer and a member of the original 2500 engineering team. He is calls himself the sound doctor. He knows and has been working with everything audio for many, many years, starting off from childhood. And one of the things that I love about Barry is that he has got a great story for everything. He has some wonderful energy. He's been supportive in vocals since we started this, and it's a real pleasure to introduce him. He's worked with both Moog and ARP, and later on has done some work with JL Audio. Welcome, Barry. All right, so we also have Kristin Warren, and Kristin Warren is performer and creator of various interactive instruments. She is a teacher at Brown University, as well as a performer, composer, and artist. She makes her own interactive instruments, as I mentioned, and she'll be happy to talk about this further. We also have John Niclasen, I knew I was going to pronounce that incorrectly, and John Ångström. They are from the G25 Virtual Analog ARP 2500, and they're going to be sharing a little demo with us shortly. I'm very excited about this. I only learned about this recently when I was actually looking up another software, that Virtual 2500 software. And when I discovered this, I found that it was absolutely magical in its rendition, both audio and visual. Their visuals are beautiful, and you'll be seeing some of that shortly. Okay, and Jim, are you ready?
Yeah, I'm trying to start my video right now.
Okay.
It says you stopped it.
All right, I just gave you.
Okay, here we go.
There you go. All right, so Jim.
Yeah, here we go.
I just want to mention something about Jim. Jim Michmerhuizen is the original author of the ARP 26 manual, and one of the names that I always heard at my dinner table when I was growing up, and of course it's a long, interesting name, Michmerhuizen, so it's quite easy to remember. He is the founder of the Boston School of Electronic Music, a poet, a musician of classical proclivity, and an amazing intellect and just a joyous human. So I'm very happy to have you here as the moderator. So I'm going to bow out gracefully while I figure out the sound problem and have you take it away. Thank you so much, Jim.
Yeah, thanks for that introduction, Dina, and thanks for the invitation in the first place. Let me see. I guess we have everybody here. I see Christina, I see Barry, I see John, and who else? Yeah, you two are on the same panel with John Niclasen. Okay.
John Niclasen, John Ångström. I think I said it better this time. Kristin Warren,
okay.
And Barry Ober, and I guess we're waiting for David Friend.
Okay. All right. What should we talk about? I'll say a few things. I know my first exposure to what was at that time Tonus was I saw some literature for the 2500. This would have been around mid 1970s, something like that, and it produced a completely different impression visually. I wonder if the rest, you guys had the same sort of impression looking at it compared to, say, the version of Moog that was on the cover of Switched on Bach. What was your impression of the 2500? We have some other questions coming up, but let's talk about that for a second. Barry?
There we go. Sorry. So
Okay.
I would say,
What was it visually?
well, visually, when I started at Tonus, the 2500 didn't exactly exist yet.
Yeah.
My contribution, if anything, and I would say that I probably contributed 1% relative to what everybody else did, but my little tiny contribution was the cherry slide switches. I used to get all of these engineering magazines, and I would circle all the bingo cards in the back. Of course, this is lifetimes before internets and interwebs, but I would circle all these bingo cards and wonderful literature and catalogs, and occasionally a free little thing would show up in the mail. So I would go to all the trade shows also. So I circled the bingo card, got a cherry switch in the mail, and when we were discussing about the patch cords, the discussion started with everybody saying, well, we don't want to use the 1/4-inch tip ring sleeve that Moog was using, because first of all, we want to be different. And second of all, it's too big and it's too expensive. We want a greater panel density of connections. So I said, well, let's evaluate this. And, you know, one idea was to use pin jacks where the wires are small and the pins are very small diameter. But as soon as everyone saw the cherry switches, everyone's face lit up. And that's how that happened.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It gave that gave the 2500 its characteristic look, relatively antiseptic compared to the almost comparatively biological appearance
Good point.
of a Moog full of patch cords.
Good point.
You know?
Good point.
Yeah.
And as you familiarized yourself with the instrument and you sat there and stared at it, you could get a much easier perception of what the patches were doing, coming and going and coming and going, than with all the messy patch cords laying around.
That's right, because it would be impossible to make a mess out of those switches.
That's right.
Right. I mean,
so you've got
I can picture myself sitting 6 feet away and visually by eye tracking across to see what's connected to what.
And then
you're a little bit familiar with the modules beforehand. You fellas, John, Niclasen, did you clearly doing a software version of the 2500? You're committed from the get-go to making something that looks like a 2500. Even though being digital and everything like that, it doesn't have the real cherry switches. Everything in a digital version of a synthesizer is an imitation, right?
Yeah.
It is. Did you have fun doing that?
A lot, but you know, this was the only way we could get our hands on this beautiful machine because so few were ever made, and we just wanted to, you know, see how it went out in real life.
Yeah.
So that's really the reason why we wanted one ourselves.
Yeah.
And
I'm sorry, I only learned of your existence a couple of days ago, and I haven't had a chance to download your machine to my Linux desktop and try it out, but I will.
Yeah.
And I'll let you know.
There's a Linux version, so you're very welcome.
I was overjoyed to see that that was the case. That's been just as a little footnote.
About the visuals?
That there haven't been many Linux implementations of the digital software synthesis that's going on. I'm lucky. You're
about the visuals, I can explain how it was drawn. I had this laptop computer, and I really wanted the real thing in front of me. So the size of the modules is the real side on a real ARP 2500 when I see it on my laptop. So I can zoom in and I can see the modules in the right sizes, all the dial knobs in the right sizes and placed correctly next to each other as if I had a real one in front of me.
Yeah.
Well, I remember seeing from your website the full panel is something like 6,000 pixels wide.
Yeah.
Right.
6,000 times 3,600 or something.
You have to
it's huge.
Right, to get it on a 27-inch monitor. But then we can zoom in if we want.
You can zoom in as you want. Yeah, exactly. And also the audio part of this, we also try to do as close as the original as we could at all. So it's very, very high quality. Otherwise, it wouldn't matter. It's like
with a high sampling rate, right?
It's 24-bit and
96 kilohertz.
Yeah, that's
so it's studio quality.
Yeah,
and that's also why, you know, when like Jean-Michel talks about the beautifulness of turning a dial, you don't have that. But at least because this is a standalone and not a VST, maybe this is a bit technical, but still, you know, the dial rate is like 4 billion possibilities, and that's what gives it something that is close to the original.
Yeah, I remember being pretty disappointed, 15 years ago or so, at some of the earlier implementations of digital synthesis that did not have adequate sampling rates, and the oscillators would just turn to crap if you started trying to do audio frequency modulation, that kind of stuff.
Exactly.
I guess that era is past. That's now back in prehistory.
In the last 10 or 15 years, the computer technology has developed into a state where you can actually have a supercomputer in front of you.
Yeah.
And it's possible to make so high quality that maybe you can't tell the difference between a digital version and the true analog version.
Yeah, that's tremendously important.
You couldn't do that 20 or 30 years ago.
Or even 10.
Well, that's right. I remember early reviews of, I don't know if anybody remembers the implementation of a 2600 in software. That was from Way Out Where. That was right. And that was, I raved about that because it was the first one I had found that had an adequate sampling rate. But the price you paid was that all the reviews said, hey, it eats up CPU time like you wouldn't believe.
Yeah.
You can't win.
This one doesn't.
You mentioned control surfaces and knobs, and the fact that none of the knobs on your 2500 are real.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the question of control, which brings us to Kristin Warren and some of the work that she's been doing. Tell us about it.
Thank you. Yes. Well, so glad to be here. Thank you, Dina, for organizing, and really an honor to be here and speak with all of you and think through this wonderful technology. So I build various technologies to interface with modular synthesizers, including the 2500. I've also really enjoyed the G2500 for teaching and my own creative use, I'll say. So as I think about control, I mean, I kind of work across a variety of areas. For instance, for many years, I was working with voice and laptop, and then I got interested in voice as voltage, so to speak. What if the voice is no longer kind of a sonic expressive signal, but I convert it through feature extraction and other means to a control voltage, which then, of course, can go easily into modular synths. I did that using various microcontrollers, including Bella, Arduino, and whatnot. At this point, for the last few years, I've been working mainly with CMOS logic chips, the digital but non-computational paradigm. To me, that's really fascinating, how much richness and complexity do we get my machines out of just a kind of a very complex network of square waves, basically, but then having to interface that over to such, you know, I think of the ARP 2500 as, by comparison, such a nuanced palette. Working in the analog realm, I find that so fascinating to translate between true digital and analog. To me, that happens in a lot of ways, expressively, but also in terms of control possibilities. If I'm thinking about what's happening on the screen, what's happening in a very tactile way in front of me. So that's kind of a basic overview of my research.
Yeah, yeah. And I see that David Friend just appeared here, and we're making him an honorary member of our engineering team. To comment on, I have one question. How much time at ARP Instruments at Tonus elapsed from the earliest design? I mean, somebody had to conceive of how all of this synthesis capability was going to be presented to its users. There had to be some kind of a uniform, and Barry mentioned already the cherry switches and so on. How much time elapsed from the first drawings and conceptions of what the panel visuals and configuration were going to be like to the time it was complete enough to be able to start designing product literature? You see what I mean?
Hey, Jim. Been a long time.
Yeah, there we are.
Yeah. So when I met Al, he already had the cherry switch idea kind of picked out.
Okay.
And you know, that was about as far as we were at that time. We had the cherry switches picked out, and he had a you know, a couple of designs for VCOs, which, you know, he perceived as being the biggest issue back then. I don't know, when we built the first synthesizer, we had to produce some literature, and I think that was pretty early on. You know, it was homegrown, and my wife Margaret, I think, actually designed all the, you know, the very early pieces that we had, and Dina's collected some of the early stuff. You know, I'm pretty sure we had you know, sort of flyers describing the modules and the whole thing. Probably, you know, I'm guessing by March or April of 1970. You know,
okay,
around the time of the first shipment.
Yeah. How many 2500s roughly were manufactured and sold during the ARP's lifetime?
Dina asked me that too, and I don't remember. Yeah, it wasn't a whole lot. My guess is, you know, we were making 2 or 3 a month, maybe.
Yeah.
So, you know, less than 100, I think.
Yeah. And then there were some of the monsters that could easily themselves have been broken up into 2 or 3 units, like the famous one for the Close Encounters movie.
That's right. Yeah.
And in fact, we've seen here today, as background for a couple of the participants, we've seen machines that are bigger than that.
Yeah, there were some people just.
Yeah, there.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's interesting that you mentioned the switch idea, the cherry switches. In a sense, preceded the visuals for any of the individual modules.
Yeah, I think, you know, Al had, by the time I met Al in late 1969, you know, he had the basic cabinet idea with cherry switch above, cherry switch below. And, you know, he had picked some dimension for the height. You know, the width of the module is determined by the cherry switch. But the height of the modules, I think he picked 8 inches or something like that as being sufficient. And he had a panel design for a VCO, and I think he had a panel design for a VCF, which we modified significantly, and then he had an envelope generator that I changed around quite a bit. We came out with a dual envelope generator, and then I think a quad envelope generator, something like that. So that was all, within the first year or two. But then there was, a whole bunch of other modules got designed over the next few years.
Yeah.
I'd like to interrupt for a moment. I'd like to, before we continue this conversation, I would like to show a few excerpts from the G2500. Now that we're talking about modules, because actually I prefer if John, are you ready to do a screen share?
He's muted. Here we go.
Yes, we can try and do that.
Okay.
I think it would be best if I close this video and then start the desktop instead.
Okay, great. And I also, I'm going to show an excerpt from Chris Myers. We have a wonderful collection of educational resources in conjunction with this symposium that go over all the different, yes.
It's because as you are the host, you have to enable screen sharing for the participants, for the panelists. Otherwise, we cannot share. And you have to make sure that the sound sharing is enabled too.
You got it. You're ready. It should be enabled for everybody, all the panelists.
Yeah, it should come up to you. Here it is.
Wow. So this is just a simple example.
There you have an example of zooming. So this is what you want to do. This is just a quick one.
Yeah, I can do that. Why don't we have sound? No?
I don't know, is it the same sound sharing issue that we had before?
You should have an option to share a computer all the time. There it goes.
Oh, you see, there's the... Yeah. Just add another module. This is just a short introduction to show how this looks and how it sounds. Of course, it can be much more complex than this. You know that.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
And let's throw one more on. So hopefully this also reminds you of how this is on the original. And just one.
So that's a little demo I finished here.
That was great.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
All right.
Yeah, of course, there are lots of more modules, but it's just, you can ask anything if you wanna do so.
I have one question, maybe
Yeah,
two. Do you have
Yeah.
plans to create modules that did not exist in the original 2500?
Actually, we talked about it now that we heard that there were some, should we say, early modules that maybe weren't made, but still, you know, all the machinery is inside the coding now, so that's of course possible.
Yeah.
So if anything, yeah.
Yeah. I have a list of things that I want. I want a frequency shifter, single sidebands, you know, from separate outputs. I want hard sync. I want linear FM input. A couple of other things. We can
Sure.
negotiate. Okay.
You got it. You got it.
Okay. All right.
My view on this is I want the foundation to be really solid. So I want it to get as close to the real ARP 2500 first.
Yeah. Yes.
And then do the modules that have been made. We just missed
The
2
manufactured
or
ones.
3 of the manufactured models.
Yeah.
When that's done, then there's a lot of possibilities to expand on this concept and invent all different kind of modules.
How many
Yeah.
modules at this point?
Yeah, because the one big issue in the, as far as I can see, in the industry at large now is the big no man's land of control surfaces and control possibilities and how to do that. What's important depends entirely on what kind of music you're making and interested in making.
Yeah, and interesting interfaces like Kristin is doing with her. Like most people just use a mouse and a keyboard, and it's just not good enough. We have to do more than that to really be artistic.
Yeah, I mean, what I've seen at public concerts from non-tonal people is anybody who's sophisticated winds up with their own entirely unique set of patches and the controllers for them, so that they wind up, the only way to think of this is they have used their synthesizer to build an instrument for themselves. They're the only person who knows how to use it. There's some wonderful control things available.
Yeah, actually, if I can comment on that, because like Christina is doing a lot of stuff with external, you know, kind of affecting the music. We are doing that actually. We're not showing today, but we are doing the electronics ourselves, and that's all kinds of dials and knobs and stuff. It's so that you can so you can get the feel and that you have this. I think Jean-Michel called it a little bit sexual feeling about how to turn this down.
A close relationship with your instrument. That's important, I think.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Christina, anything to say about that?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I appreciate the points you all are raising. I think I might sort of nuance that by questioning the nature of control personally. And I think I see in the market, I mean, there's a desire to distance oneself from control in a way. We have control as just kind of a broad paradigm in electronic music, but people are increasingly setting up kind of control systems, if you will, that are recursive or feedback based, unpredictable. You know, a single gestural input might cause any number of outputs, or perhaps nothing unpredictably. So I think, at least for myself, and I see artistically in the landscape today, more of perhaps a collaborative approach to working with the technology as an actant in itself. I find that really fascinating. To me, both the ARP 2500 and the G2500 in different ways have a sense of mystery and vastness. Even if I'm well familiar with the modules, I appreciate that. And so whatever kind of new control mechanisms I bring to it, I hope also have some kind of depth or, open to questioning.
Exactly,
So,
and by bridging this, trying to make the analog virtual in a version, you actually have more opportunities to, influence the sound with your body itself. It could be, kind of
like the theremin.
It could be fields that you are moving around in, and it could be something you're wired to, and that is just a bit easier when you have the electronics to do it, of course. If you have to wire yourself up to the original, I think it's more physical. But again, it's both worlds meeting, kind of.
So one of the most exciting concerts that I've seen in the last several years was about 5 years ago. A guy from Europe somewhere came locally to a coffee house and performed on what he called circuit bending. Where he had just taken, you've heard that expression, he just took ordinary electronic toys and disassembled them or partially smashed them. They were all battery driven, and what they were capable of was only what you could empirically they were not designed. What you could empirically discover of the sounds that they would make if you touched them here or there or another thing, but it was glorious. It was a paradigm example, of the kind of thing that we're talking about here, and the kind of issues that Kristin just raised about what constitutes control. I mean, if you don't know what the machine in front of you is going to do, and if you can't know what it's going to do in response to your touching it, does that qualify as control at all? I don't know. So we're somewhere on a continuum between John Cage and J.S. Bach.
Maybe we should ask David about the controls. David, how much were you involved with the controls back in around 1970? I think we need your sound.
You need to unmute.
The design of the modules?
Yeah, the controlling stuff, how much of that was discussed?
Oh, I don't remember. I mean, I designed quite a few of the modules, after I got there. The sample and hold, the I forget what they called it, the sort of the 10 position switch, the quad envelope generator. There was a module that has a complete synthesizer in one module.
Yeah. A voice, yeah.
Yeah, I designed.
But did you experiment with theremin? That's a very, very old instrument where you can.
Yeah, I mean, when I was in college, I experimented with a theremin, but quickly determined it was at least unplayable.
Yeah, unplayable, exactly.
I have seen some people play it, which is pretty amazing.
Jean-Michel Jarre. He can do it.
He can.
And Kristin, maybe.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, extremely difficult instrument to play. But I had worked, there was an electronic music studio at Columbia University that had, done a lot of things with, it was kind of early computer-driven stuff. And, I did quite a bit of work there. And, when I got to Yale, I built the electronic music studio at Yale, which, gave me a lot of ideas for what to do at ARP. And I think that's actually how Al and I met, because Al's lawyer was a Yale alumnus. And I appeared on the cover of the alumni magazine once. And, and he says, hey, look at this guy, starting a company to make synthesizers, to talk to this guy. And I was in grad school at Princeton at the time, and I get a phone call from this lawyer, Lou Pollack, and who I'm sure Dina remembers.
Yes.
And he says, you know, I've got a client who's starting a synthesizer company, and you know, be interested in talking to you. So I flew up to Boston, and Al drove me around in his old Saab, and you know, talking a mile a minute. And you know, a week or so later, I dropped out of grad school and moved up to Boston. So
Yeah.
that's how we met. But I've lost that. Dina has a really poor copy, but I lost that original Yale Alumni magazine that had me on the cover, surrounded by all this gear, a lot of which was requisitioned, midnight requisitioned, I would say.
I think it appears in Alex Ball's video, which I'm going to try to show at some point, just a section of it.
Yeah.
But that's a great picture. I want to pause for a moment because I want to give some of the attendees an opportunity to ask the panel some questions, if you're all open to that. So the first question I'm seeing right now is from Dave Reed. He wants to. He's asking if the G2500 standalone is it the standalone only, or is it available as a plugin?
Yeah, we got that question many times, and as we kind of tried to say before, to be true to the original ARP, there are just things that you cannot do and put into a VST at this point. I think we have to expand the technology to do that, really. It would be nice to do it, but still you would be moving away from what is true to the original, right?
Yeah. For one thing, the interface is just huge. So normally plugins, they have a more compact interface. Then there's the problem that you can fill the different modules. You decide what the modules you put in there. And I think there's a limit in plugins, how many controls you can have at one time. So if you put modules in with a lot of buttons, you just run out. It's like 150 buttons or something, dial knobs, something like that.
Yeah, and also the fact that if you just take one of the oscillators, and in this coding, you're using 32-bit floating points, right? Then there are actually 4 billion steps in one button, and you cannot just put any into a VST, although we really, really want to do it, but it's going to be next step, I guess.
No, VST often use floating point values between 0 and 0.0 and 1.0. So it's actually only about a little less than 30 bits of information. But we are using the full 32 bits of information on the dial knobs. I just implemented that in the latest version, which was released a couple of days ago. And so you can dial the knob on the D2500s in more than 4 billion positions.
And that brings back to the discussion of control, right? Because if you don't have that, and often people say, but that doesn't matter. But it actually does on the ARP because it's so crazy. So I just use that way.
It's possible to make patches where you can dial in the small steps and hear the difference.
Exactly.
So if when a VST version is made at some point, it will be reduced version. It will not be like this. The goal with this is not to make a VST or plugin. The goal with this is to be as close to the original ARP 2500 as possible in software and computer technology as today. And then we can develop on that and make versions for different markets or different users.
Yep.
Okay.
Sounds good. From Hans Kulk, he's asking the panelists, what happened with that mysterious triple modulator module? Did I say that correctly? Hans, I'm gonna put you off of mute for a second because he's one of our panelists. If you want to unmute, are you there?
Yeah, I'm there. Yeah, I'm
Okay.
there. Oh, hi all. Yeah, I noticed. Hi everybody. Somewhere in my collection during the years of copies of documentation, I saw only one photo of the triple modulator. I think it was the 1032, 33 or something, of 1033rd. I always thought it would be a wonderful addition to the range of modules that are normally there. And,
what did it modulate?
What, sorry?
What did it modulate?
I think it was just 3 ring modulators or VCAs.
Okay, VCA.
But I have no data, so I'm
right, yeah.
I'm still very curious, you know.
We have to make it up. Well, whatever. Sure, probably VCAs.
Okay.
Does that ring a bell with you, Dave?
No, I remember it, but I don't. For some reason or other, we never brought it to market.
Okay.
But yeah, I remember working on the design of that thing, but I don't. I think there just wasn't much of a demand for it, so we decided not to make it.
Ah, too bad. But could be a great job for the guys of the virtual one,
yeah,
right?
Exactly.
if there is still information on the specs,
Why, I don't know.
they could probably build it and make it into existence, right?
Yeah, they could.
Yeah, between the bunch of
Thank
us,
you.
we do have some spec information. I would like to go back a little bit and see if you'll give me a chance to try to do a video again. Chris Meyer, who's going to be in our next moderator for our next panel discussion, is an educator of modular instruments. He's got a business called Learning Modular, and he set up a bunch of interesting small articles that is on the website. And because I think it's so pertinent to this particular panel, especially because it's talking about patching with switch matrices, I would like to play this a little bit, get a couple more questions, and then we can go on. So let's see if I can do this. Everyone has been so kind and patient with me. I'm going to go ahead and share screen, and hopefully it's going to share computer sound as well. Look at that. Oh boy, nope. They want to do some kind of, hold on a second. It's never easy, is it? All right. No, it asks for some password, which is very strange. So let's try this again. There's nothing more humbling than having to do. Nope, it keeps wanting to do that. All right, I'm going to try one more time, and then I'm going to ask my tech support co-host assistant. All right, let's try this. Oh, yeah. All right, I'm going to try this and see if it works. And if it doesn't, we will put it on later.
One of the main motivations for using a synthesizer
Yeah,
is its
yeah.
ability to create sounds ranging from familiar to those that cannot be created by any traditional instrument. Similarly, some synthesizer modules make it possible for the composer or performer to create strings of notes that may be impossible to play by hand. The most common tool for this is a module known as a sequencer. For those unfamiliar with them, a sequencer has a number of steps that can be adjusted to represent individual notes, but also other information such as loudness, articulation, and timbre of the note. The composer performer sets the values of these parameters ahead of time and then uses either an external clock from another module or often a built-in clock to step through the sequence of notes over and over again. The ARP module 1027 clock to sequential control featured 10 steps or positions with controls to set 3 different voltage output settings per position. It too could be set through its positions using an external trigger or by using its internal voltage controlled clock with a pulse repetition frequency that could go from 20 steps or beats per minute to 400 steps per second, well into the audio range. In addition to outputting the 3 voltages associated with each position, the 1027 could also send a gate signal as each new note was started. The pulse width of this gate is set either by a front panel control or separate voltage control input. When this gate signal is patched to an envelope generator, the pulse width determines how long the envelope is held at its sustain phase. It's set as a percentage of the note's overall duration, from staccato to tenuto. Since the voltage control parameter rose to the module 10 own voltage controlled clock rate and pulse width, the composer had considerable control of the duration and articulation of each individual notes in the sequence. It's amazing to think that the module 1027 could do all this with essentially transistor-based technology compared to the microprocessors that control most sequencers today.
Okay, I think we might have had a little bit more success. I'm not sure.
It was perfect at the end.
It was perfect at the end. All right. All right, great. I would like to offer one or two more questions to the attendees, please, if you would like. If not, I do have a question for Christina. Let me see, my Q&A is getting pretty big here. Okay. Okay, yes. You guys are great trying to help me with this. They asked me for a password, or I had to restart Zoom, and I thought that might be a disaster. So we did it the hard way. I turned up the volume. So all right, Kristin, you know, it is what it is. Oh, this is a wonderful question. Okay. Richard Bug, there is a level of tactile connection between the artist and the instrument that you have with physical devices that's missing from on-screen emulations. There's a lot of muscle memory involved in playing traditional acoustic instruments and with using the voice. I would like to know who has been working on bridging physical tactile controls with the virtual instruments. And I wonder, Christina, can you answer that question? I think
I can speak to that. It is interesting. I agree there's not really muscle memory per se with the on-screen instruments. I mean, I guess using the mouse or the computer keyboard perhaps. I do think a well-designed one will still give something back though. I might add, if I think about NAMM, other similar trade shows these days, there seems to be a tendency to omnifunctionality. And that can be almost too big a space. So I'm personally very interested in instruments that do very particular things. And so to me, the connection, virtual or tactile, is not irrelevant, but it's just another axis to consider. When I do think specifically about the virtual instruments, so again, trying to get away from that omnifunctionality, personally, I'm invested in having as little on screen as possible. If I think of software design, if I think of my sort of screen real estate, so maybe I'm zoomed out these days, but you know, my interaction with the computer will be input. That's my preference. And then what I'm seeing on the screen, I prefer not to see a ton of control. Maybe that gets at what you're asking about having kind of a visual overload of seeing a lot. So I try to balance those things in terms of actually not wanting too much control and what I have, not wanting to see a lot of it, and leave that more under the hood.
thank you so much. Thank you. Are there any ending remarks, or Jim, would you like to make
as a footnote, maybe to Christina's point, it's useful, and I think to simply consider, each of us, from what our experience of music has been, almost any of the available acoustical instruments can be played with your eyes shut. It's routine to see a performer deeply into the music that he's doing, performing with his eyes shut, which means his entire interaction with the instrument is tactile. I can't quite imagine anything even distantly resembling that in our current interfaces to our audio synthesis equipment. We have a long way to go. I think it's not that the issue of control is a problem, it's that it's an unlimited space. You look in the audio and the synthesis magazines and online, you can find at least a half dozen radically different designs available. Some of these are clearly from people who are making them as a craft by hand, one at a time, inventing their own conventions for how the things are going to work, leaving it entirely up to the user to decide what synthesis modules their controller is going to control and in what way. The field is wide open. If there's a problem, it's that there's so many different things available and you can't learn to play them all at once. Nobody's ever going to make an orchestra out of these things.
I think that's a good point, Jim. And, and sometimes people ask me, why does the 2600 have a particular sound, or why does the Odyssey have a particular sound? And it's not so much the electronics, but it's, just the layout of the controls on the panel and so forth. Gives the way you interact with those controls is what determines how the instrument sounds. And even to this day, I can still tell on recordings and so forth if I'm listening to an Odyssey, because there's certain ways that the pitch bend is used, and the way you introduce vibrato, and there's certain sounds and characteristics that are just easy to do given the way the controls are laid out.
Yeah, well, if you can tell that difference, you have better ears than I do. I can't for the life of me. So I can't make any sense out of questions about what one synthesizer sounds like as opposed to another. Yeah. But I believe that there are people who can, and evidently you're one of them.
I play classic piano and a little bit of guitar, and we are actually working on hardware additional to interface with the 2500 software version. So we're working on stuff.
Yeah. So exactly what you say, that there are just things missing on the market, and we are looking at that from the electronic perspective as well to interact in other ways. So that's interesting. But I also want to remark that when you say the difference between the different synthesizers, but even though we created this, programmed it, all the stuff, there is so many possibilities in the ARP 2500. So even we are surprised to hear what's coming out of it. And we are constantly discovering new stuff, saying, wow, this is just, I don't think that the sound was ever created on Earth. So, and that's quite an adventure.
And it's
be honest.
50 years ago, that instrument.
Yeah, so we just like
mind-blowing.
We are hands down.
It's really incredible instrument, the original ARP 2500. And thinking that's 50 years ago.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's also amazing.
Yeah.
I have one question which I'm gonna end this session with, and this question is actually to our moderator, Jim Michmerhuizen, but anyone is welcome to chime in, and then we're going to start right away. And this is a great question because I've heard this before. what are the major differences between the 2500 and the 2600 in terms of sound design and patching routing possibilities?
Well, yeah, the biggest difference in a way is not sonically significant, except in the sense that David defined, that the interface itself, the 2600 and its face panel graphics was completely revolutionary as far as I can see. It is intrinsically educational. Even to learn a 2600 on your own with no assistance from anybody and without reading the manual, it's possible, maybe rare, but it's possible. But to do that, if you succeed in doing that, you know things that you didn't know before, and you learn them from the panel graphics on the 2600. That, I think, is that the only thing I can compare that with is Bob Moog's original decision to incorporate voltage control into each of his modules. That was in itself was as significant as a decade or so earlier in computers, somebody's decision to make use exactly the same kind of formats for their data as they did for their programs. When the signals you're generating with your oscillator simply consist of fluctuating voltages, and then you put an input on your modules that will accept fluctuating voltages as input to control what the modules are doing, you've opened up a kind of recursive logic that has no boundaries, that has no end. It's incredible. And that was the 2600 that made that clear, even though voltage control was all over the 2500 as well. You know, it was not visually presented as clearly with the 2500, or persuasively, let's say, certainly clearly, but wasn't presented as persuasively with the 2500 as it was with the 2600. That's the biggest significant difference that I can think of between the two.
Well, there was a progression, you know, from the total flexibility of the 2500 to a little less flexibility, kind of an 80-20 principle. You know, you can make 80% of the sounds with 20% of the effort.
Yeah.
On the 2600, and then the Odyssey took that one step further, where, you know, because when we originally designed the 2600, I think we were thinking mostly about an educational market. You know, because the 2500 was for the most part sold to university electronic music studios.
Yeah.
Even though, you know, some of the guys like George Harrison and so forth picked them up.
Yeah.
Way. But then the 2600, the sales of the 2600 actually went mostly to performing groups and private studios.
Yeah.
And, you know, really started to get traction in the pop music business. And that's when the sort of the light bulb went on for me, which is, you know, the next step is to make this a real stage instrument. And that was the intent of the Odyssey. I was the one that had to make the first sales call of a synthesizer manufacturer on a retail music store, which was Manny's Music on 48th Street. And I remember the 2600 in there and showing them, and they basically deposited me back out on 48th Street.
Yeah.
And I went next door to Sam Ash Music, and they took one on consignment and sold it like 3 days later, and then ordered another one. And then Manny's called up and apologized. And they became, I think, our largest dealer, responsible for a gray market of ARP synthesizers all over the world.
Which continues today. Thank you, gentlemen, and Kristina. I am so grateful for all of your work here and for your time. I have to jump on the next panel because we need to keep somewhat of a schedule, but I will offer to everybody at the end of this synthposium, I would like to keep the door open for a few more questions and answers. So those of you who are going to be here at the end of the symposium, hopefully we can get to a few more questions, because I think there's a lot of great interaction going on here with ideas. The audience the attendees are coming up with some really great ideas for mods, and have some great questions, and this is what this is all about. So I'm going to ask those of you who are on the engineer panel to, except for Jim Michmerhuizen, to turn off your cameras, and we're going to get on to the next panel. But again, at the end of this, we're going to have another question and answer period. So those of you who have the opportunity to stick around, please.